Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to why people think the moon landing is fake. Now I don't think it's fake, but there is a part of me that does think, like, how was this possible? It was 1969, so what, 54 years ago. So ages, like ages and ages ago. And I mean, they recorded it, they live streamed it. It was all done live. How that's even possible? Like, for example, I can't even get signal in like half the country that I'm in. And I know that's not like a big, like, actual factor, but you got to think about the technology 50 years ago, how different it was, how much worse it was, and the fact they were able to stream from the moon, to live stream from the moon of what was happening. I can't really comprehend it because that is such a wild thing to even think about. Like, you can't get signal in the ocean, which I understand, but then the fact that you can't have those sorts of things, but then you can then get signal or whatever from the moon. Do you need signal to live stream? I assume you do. I don't really actually know how it works, but those little things, it is mind blowing. I do think it is legit. Just those things, when you think about it, it is pretty insane how it was possible. But there are parts of me that I just can't comprehend it, because we don't really have people going to the moon now, and I think it's more so for safety reasons, because it's just not very safe, which is obvious, and I understand. But yeah, we're going to see. I've not really looked much into it, to be honest, so that is my sort of thought process without really having much knowledge on it. But we're going to check this out and see the in-depth details. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. If you were alive for the moon landing, let me know how exciting it was, because I think even if there was a moon landing now, of someone landing on the moon, I would be excited for that, even though it was done 50 years ago, because it's just something that seems so insane. But yeah, we're going to check this out. Links are also in the description to my Patreon, where you can see reactions that I can't post to YouTube. But let's check this out and see why people think it's fake. What percentage of people think it's fake? If you're in the comments, I wish you could do like polls on YouTube comments, but you can't. Let me know if you think it's legit or not, and then I guess leave your reasoning behind why you have that opinion. But we're going to check this out and see this video.
4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Looks like Neil is coming in 5 by there. 11, Mike, see you in the background.
If you don't believe that humans ever landed on the moon, you'd probably think that on July 16, 1969, a select group of government officials, a crew of filmmakers sworn to secrecy, and a famed Hollywood director named Stanley Kubrick all gathered on a soundstage in a military base, deep in the Nevada desert, better known as Area 51. And here they pulled off the greatest hoax in history. You'd probably think that astronauts, or should I say actors, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins fled this rocket through a secret passageway just before it took off for space, totally empty. And you would have to believe that the estimated 400,000 people who were involved in this mission were in on it, all promising to take this secret to their grave.
400,000 people involved. What?
22% of Americans either don't believe that we landed on the moon or harbor some doubt.
To advance the technology of spaceflight.
See, I feel like I'm in between the doubt and believing it's true, because there is that sort of, there is an in between, because it is just so to me, I didn't grow up anywhere around this time, but there is just some sort of things about it that just seem unreal, to be honest.
We looked at the tapes and the countless photos. We talked to astrophysicists, meteorologists, and NASA historians to better understand the moon landing conspiracy, how it started, what hoaxers use as their evidence, and what this belief teaches us about why some conspiracies are so enduring. Okay, real quick. One of the big revolutions in science in recent decades is an understanding of our minds. We have learned more and more that
Scott is getting his money? Come on. What's it for? BetterHelp? What's the ad? What's the BetterHelp.com, Johnny Harris. If you want to support him and get a little cheeky discount, you know what to do.
Alright, so to give you some context on the
Getting
moon
his
landing,
money.
I need to briefly explain World War II and the Cold War, which is something I've kind of done a lot on this channel. So instead of me doing it again, we hired someone with an old-timey, like, radio transatlantic accent to do it instead. Buckle up for this one.
In a world on the brink of destruction, the United States of America joined the Allied forces in the Second World War in 1941. The Big Three: the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and now the USA versus the Axis powers: Italy, Japan, and Nazi Germany. They sure did put up a fight, but the Allied powers came out on top, you see. But then America and the USSR got real cold with each other. A tragic reversal of the old tales of enemies turned lovers. The communists found the United States to be exceedingly aggressive and quite trigger-happy with all their new military powers, meddling in things they ought to be keeping their noses out of. Across the pond, the capitalist United States was fearful that the USSR was hankering to spread their communism across the whole globe. The war remained cold only because both powers had thousands of the most deadly weapons humanity had ever seen and wouldn't dare use them against each other. It was something of a horrifying stalemate. Soon, the empires turned to other feats of strength: psychological warfare, spying, sports, proxy wars, and a race to advance their technologies. And to top it all, a race like no other. A race to space.
At first, it is very clear that the Soviets are winning the race.
Oh wow, they were winning.
They're launching dogs and plants into space and bringing them back alive. They send up satellites that orbit the moon and take photos of the far side that no one had seen before. They even put a human up into space to orbit around the entire Earth.
The first spaceflight would be made by a Soviet man.
The US needs to catch up, so President Eisenhower creates a brand new government agency dedicated entirely to space.
Which NASA,
and they eventually start to send up...
NASA isn't even now. I mean, I guess it makes sense because space travel, like the idea of that, isn't something that has been going on for that long either. But so yeah, right, the Soviet Union were ahead at this point, which is fascinating to me. I didn't realize that would have been the case.
Satellites and even people, but they don't get someone to orbit the entire Earth like the Russians did. Womp womp, the US is losing the space race. And this is where JFK gets up in front of the nation and declares that the US is setting a goal.
In this decade, we shall make up and move ahead.
He's declaring what...
Gotta say, for the time, like how long ago this was, the quality of this is crazy. This is what, 60 years ago? The quality for 60 years ago, god damn.
We shall make up and move ahead.
He's declaring what would surely be the ultimate finish line in this global race for power.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade.
An American astronaut eventually orbits the Earth.
Not because they are easy.
Russia then puts the first woman in space while also getting the first person to walk in space.
But because they are hard.
The NASA teams are pulling all-nighters year after year, trying to figure out how they're going to make good on JFK's big promise, to somehow get a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Things are heating up. Time is running out. And then...
Launch sequence engaged. We are go. Boss, did you read us?
NASA's disaster was a major setback, but the stakes were too high to give up. The space race had become much more than a technological rivalry. Winning the race to the moon would mean winning the ideological war for the world. Would it be communism or capitalism? They couldn't give up now, so they kept going. In 1968, NASA finally gets a spaceship, the Apollo 8, to orbit the moon with astronauts aboard. There's hope. Russia is able to exchange a crew in space. For both sides, a moon trip suddenly seems within reach. But who will get there first?
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
And then, after hundreds of millions of dollars and countless focused hours by the country's brightest minds, comes a morning on a summer day in Houston, Texas in 1969.
10.
See, when I gave my opinion, I did sort of forget to realize that they would have had seen them take off from Earth. which does make you think, okay, yeah, that just makes it guarantees what really happened. Then I did sort of forget that would have been known. That would have been known, honestly.
3 men buckle up. Hundreds of millions of people around the world find themselves glued to their television sets because the greatest achievement of mankind might happen. Then starts the 5, 4, 3, 2,
1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
Here we got a roll program.
I've never seen this before, by the way. First time seeing this.
Apollo 11 on proper heading.
Getting goosebumps just watching
And a
it.
pitches program.
What a picture.
The rocket heads towards the finish line. That pearly orb that humans have stared at and mythologized about, fixated on. And they're finally going to touch it.
Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
4 days and 200,000 miles later, it's July 20th, 1969, months before JFK's deadline was up. 2 of the 3 astronauts disconnect from the orbiting ship and descend onto the
Wait, so one of them was left just on their own. Poor guy, man.
moon's surface. And then,
There you go. Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. It really is.
Holy shit, man.
oof, these fumes. The race had clearly been won. A line had been crossed, not just for the global superpower who did this, but for all humans who had just taken their obsession for exploration to new heights. But right away, after this event, even though it was broadcast on live television for the whole world to see, there were rumblings of doubt. About a year after the landing, you start to see newspaper articles casting doubt that any of this actually happened. 2 years after the landing, we see James Bond running away from a bunch of security guards through the Nevada desert when he somehow stumbles upon a secret moon landing film set, resulting in this moon buggy car chase thing through the desert. It was all a tongue-in-cheek reference to this budding conspiracy that the whole thing was faked.
Oh, wow.
A few years later, a former US Navy officer and Apollo rocket technical writer comes out with this book.
See, when this sort of stuff happens, do you think these people are just looking for attention, or I mean, I guess no one will actually know. But anyone can come out of these books, right? Because they're gonna they've had like the experience of working somewhere, so they've probably got, in terms of the public opinion, they've got some sort of grounds of telling the truth. So they're gonna make a crazy amount of money just making a book based on something that could just all be fake from their opinion. But you never actually know. And I mean, you've got to always take it with a pinch of salt. But if it's someone who's worked there, people are always going to take it more seriously.
I think it was an intuitive feeling that what was being shown was not real.
The book is a long evaluation of evidence that claims that we never actually went to the moon.
Crazy.
This book makes the case that the moon landing was so political that the US, having failed to develop a feasible plan to get to the moon, pulled off this secretive staging of the event, all as a propaganda play to get ahead of the Soviets. And he emphasizes the point that, it's the Cold War, it's not that far-fetched that the US government would come up with some deception campaign in the name of beating communism, which is totally fair actually. But that's not evidence, that's just speculation. He does go on to present a bunch of photos and explanations that turn into the foundation of what would become a widespread theory that the moon landing was faked.
The lunar landings were more than likely fabricated.
Why wouldn't the moon landing be fake? Why wouldn't we fake that?
We did not land men on the moon.
The moon? Yeah, it's fake.
And I would bet my life on it.
This is actually the reason I wanted to make this video, is I wanted to understand what the foundation of this conspiracy theory actually was. The people who truly earnestly believe it, what do they think happened here? I'm not going to go through all of the evidence and theories here because they're kind of all over the place, but let me show you some of the major ones. The first major one starts here.
How come there aren't any stars in this photo? There's no atmosphere or light pollution on the moon. Shouldn't this photo look like this?
Well, it turns out that if you want to capture the stars, even on the moon, you have to open up your camera for a very long time and let a bunch of light in. Trust me, I know this because I spent months of my life trying to photograph a galaxy, and I learned a lot about how not to photograph stars. And let me just tell you, it's a lot harder than it looks. When I was doing that, I was opening up my shutter for 30 seconds, and I took hundreds of images just to get this one shot. So when you're on the bright moon, and you're trying to photograph a bunch of guys in bright white reflective suits, you're not opening up your shutter for a very long time. You're not letting in a bunch of light. There's basically no chance of getting a decent shot of the stars in this environment. But you get something. I mean, if you take the photo and blast up the brightness, you can kind of see some traces of the stars.
What? That's possible? So you can change the colouring of it and you can actually see what else was there. That is mental to me.
If you really need to do that.
Okay, but what about these shadows? Some of these shadows go this way and some go this way. Shouldn't the shadows be parallel if they're all coming from...
See, when I think about this conspiracy, I never go into these details. I just think about the idea of just going to the moon.
One source, the sun?
Yes, the only light source in this photo is the sun.
The Earth
but you have to remember that light bounces off things, especially white things. So you have light bouncing off of lots of different surfaces, which is one reason the shadows look a little weird. Oh, and remember that you're looking at light that was filtered through a lens. A camera lens distorts the direction of things depending on how wide or tight it is.
Okay, but what about this flag? This flag is waving, but there's no wind on the moon.
Yes, the flag is kind of waving. But remember that this isn't a normal flag. NASA had to make a custom flag for the Apollo missions that had a horizontal rod right up here so that the flag wouldn't look like this. It had to look nice and American and patriotic. You had to be able to see it. So when the astronauts were sticking the flag in the lunar soil, the motion of that movement caused the material to move, and it kind of looks like it's waving.
Okay, but look how they're moving. This is so unnatural. It's almost like they're being pulled up by a wire. Oh, and look, did you catch that? That looks like a wire.
Okay, wait, just confession here. I was watching all of these conspiracy documentaries, like, while we were doing this story, and they're, like, incredibly tantalizing. This is the one that actually kind of got me. I was like, wait a minute, they are moving really weird. The motion is so off kilter, it looks like they're being, like, dragged by a wire. So to figure this out, we actually talked to a physicist and a meteorologist.
Never seen that before either. I've never seen that footage of them jumping on the moon.
Who helpfully explained just how different life in 1/6 Earth's gravity is. I mean, think about it. Our intuition for everything we know is calibrated to Earth's gravity. It's everything we've ever known. It's how our brains interpret the world. It's how our muscles calibrate to the world. So when you're watching these videos of these astronauts in suits that weigh 180 pounds, clunking around with their Earth gravity trained muscles on the moon, you see some really weird movements. But I mean, who knows? Maybe the two scientists we talked to are actually in on it. Maybe they're some of the 500,000 Americans who were paid by the government to keep the hoax alive, all so that we could feel like America is better than the Soviet Union in 1969. Maybe. Could be. Okay, listen, I'm not going to go through every single one of these theories. There's a lot of evidence out there. Like, why isn't there exhaust on this flame? Or why did the Eagle lander not leave a crater? What about the radiation exposure that these astronauts would have gotten? What about Neil Armstrong's boot print? Or the lost tapes? Don't get me started on lost tapes. We actually had a whole section in the script about the lost tapes, and ultimately it didn't make the cut. Now listen, I want it to be clear that you should not be ashamed if you actually want answers to these questions, especially in a time where all of us are kind of renegotiating our relationship with trust in governmental institutions. But I will tell you that after earnestly looking into this stuff, none of the presented evidence comes anywhere close to the burden of proof and evidence I would need to see to believe that the moon landing was a hoax. I will put resources in our source doc of the many instances of astrophysicists and scientists walking you through all this stuff. I think it's useful to look at. Before we move on with our story of the conspiracy theory, let me use this moment to say a word about human neurology and visual information, something I think about a lot. For me, when I sit through the evidence-based debunk on these theories, which is something we did for this story, it helps me understand the limits of human senses. Our eyes and ears and logical thinking brains were optimized for very different problems than evaluating the physics of our fellow Homo sapiens jumping around on a baby planet 200,000 miles away. Like, we're not set up for this stuff. Going through the conspiracy theory and then going through the debunks reminds me why we as a species developed other ways of sensing. other ways of measuring and knowing things about the world, other tools that aren't as intuitive to us, but that extend our power to know things that are real, that are true. If you don't lean on these tools, in other words, if you don't look to science in your evaluation, and instead rely on your optic nerve feeding grainy pixels into your great ape brain, I think we can all agree that you'll take for truth things that are not true. Okay, neurology section is over. Let's get back to it. If you're going to go down this rabbit hole and indulge your conspiracy mind like I did for this story, let's talk about what people think actually happened here. Like, all of this footage and all of these photos, what do the moon hoaxers think we're looking at? One of the most common explanations is that the US, afraid that they would be embarrassed in front of the global stage because they would fail on JFK's big promise, hired a famed Hollywood director, Stanley Kubrick, who had just released a groundbreaking space movie, and they used his visual skills to deceive the world, filming the moon landing on a soundstage in the middle of the desert. I mean, look, this rock has a perfect C on it. Is that a prop?
What the? Now this is making me not know. Oh, mate. Oh, God. Oh, my God. I want to hear the argument of them. Wait, I'm just going to search it. How did they live stream? How did they live stream from the moon? This is what I really want to know. Honestly, I can't. Apollo 11 was first manned mission to land on the moon. 20th July 1969. NASA used technology first developed in 1928 by the Scottish innovator John to develop a small, robust television camera that enabled the live broadcasts. But how? I mean, he explains what they used, but I don't know how it managed to live stream. Also, because it wouldn't have been live, right? Because they would have probably recorded it, and then it would have probably reached Earth 20 seconds later or something, right? So it wouldn't have been I guess that was how it would work anyway. Like, it wouldn't have been instantly live. Although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the distance isn't that far to the point of where that would be the case, but who knows?
Misaligned shadows, they explain as studio lights. The flag was waving because there was air conditioning in the studio, and these photos were actually taken by Stanley Kubrick's crew. All of these movements, they say, were done with wires and slow motion. And that black starless sky is just a black cloth backdrop.
That's one small step for man.
One giant
leap for mankind.
In 1977, the conspiracy theory had spread enough that NASA had to come out and issue a fact sheet responding to the claims.
Damn.
The first sentence of which is just, yes, astronauts did land on the moon.
Straight to the point.
Then a movie comes out in 1977 about the government faking a space mission, this time to Mars, to save face to the American people. But the space race was over. It wasn't the focus anymore. And eventually, so was the Cold War. This moon landing theory became more and more fringe. But inevitably, like any other good, tantalizing conspiracy theory, it was eventually repackaged and put into one of these really spooky, cheesy cable news documentaries. In 2001, Fox News aired this documentary.
On conspiracy theory, did we land on the moon?
It was basically just a repackaging of all the old theories, but for a new audience. But now it was the dawn of the internet age, and NASA had to respond to this Fox News doc by reissuing the fact sheet that they issued in 1977, but this time on a website. An innocent foreshadow to combating information on the internet. They had no idea what was coming. The doc gave the conspiracy new energy, new followers, and soon a conspiracy theorist was following Buzz Aldrin around a hotel, pestering him and demanding him to swear on the Bible that he landed on the moon. And Buzz punched him in the face. Shortly after that, a French mockumentary came out, laying out evidence that Stanley Kubrick did film the moon landing. The problem is people thought it was real.
There's a fake documentary, not a real documentary, but a fake, like a mockumentary, where he's admitting and people are talking about. Have you seen that one?
No, but that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, dude, you didn't even know there's an actual real interview with him where he admits that he faked the moon landing. But it's not.
Yeah.
It's fake.
So today, the conspiracy lives on in a world of increasing science skepticism and on an internet that fuels pretend information, and to a demographic that is more and more mistrusting of institutional knowledge. One poll found that in 2019, 11% of American millennials believed that the moon landing was staged. It's become a particularly durable...
That's less than it was, right? Because in 1970 or whatever, when it, around the time it happened, didn't he say it was like 26% that thought it was possibly fake? Or at the start he showed, what was it? Was it from 1970 or was it from current day? I'm not gonna find it, but
conspiracy theory, because it has all of the ingredients of a good conspiracy theory. It's shadowy government antagonist with political motives. It leans on the human eye and brain as the primary measuring tool for the evidence. And when you believe in stuff like this, it feels good, like you're in on a secret. So let me just end this video by telling you why I know we landed on the moon.
Let's hear it.
You are looking at a very thin section of moon rock, magnified 500 times.
First off, we brought back 900 pounds of rocks during the Apollo missions. The Soviets, who were our technological and geopolitical enemies, eventually sent a robot to the moon to collect samples of their own. These precious rocks are sent out to scientists and educators 400 times a year to be studied and examined. And it has been verified by a lot of different people who have no motive to lie that these rocks were developed in an environment completely rid of oxygen. Also, the Soviets themselves corroborated the moon landing and acknowledged that it happened. I mean, the Soviet leader kind of begrudgingly complimented the US and they published like a tiny little blurb in one of their newspapers, but like, they lost and they admitted they lost. Also, if I'm gonna rely on just my human brain logic for a second here, think about it. There were hundreds of thousands of people who were involved in the Apollo missions. Scientists, engineers, physicists, policymakers, mathematicians, all working day and night towards this goal, obsessing over every detail and then monitoring every step of the way, from Houston, Texas to the surface of the moon and back, communicating with the astronauts the whole time. So imagine 2 Texas Motor Speedway stadiums full of the brightest minds in the country, all in on the biggest deception of all time, without a single leak. And finally, if you insist on using your eyeballs as your only sensors that you will accept as proof, just look at this. This photo was taken by a telescope orbiting the moon. These are astronaut and buggy tracks here on the surface of the moon. You can even see the buggy's parking spot right here. And if you think that this photo, that yes, was originally taken by NASA, but many other photos have come out by other space stations that show physical evidence of the humans on the moon, if you think that this is still the government, like 40 years later, the kids and grandkids of the Apollo people still photoshopping pictures to keep up this elaborate ruse, I don't know what would convince you.
There we go. The moon landing probably is real. I mean, like I said at the start, I do think it's real. It's just one of those things that I just find wild that they managed to do. And all the things around it, it's just so fascinating to me. Once you realise the moon is a giant sun reflector, then you understand why there are no stars in the moon photos. To put it more technically, the moon's asphalt-coloured lunar dust reflects 12% of sunlight that hits its surface. Imagine pointing your camera at something 12% as bright as the sun. Yeah, that's very true. I applaud conspiracy theorists for being naturally skeptical and questioning everything in their life. The issue is they usually throw that same logic out the window when they find something that either confirms their basis or makes them feel smarter than everyone else. Yeah, it's a fair point. But let me know your thoughts on this. Also, if you were alive for this landing, how exciting was it? Like, it must have been such an event, man. But hopefully you enjoyed this reaction, and until next time, peace.